Well, the class envy crowd really had a good time with Mitt Romney's comment about the very poor or the extremely poor or the terribly destitute or whatever it was he said about not being all that concerned about them right now. Meaning, of course, that he, as a presidential candidate, had to be more concerned with the middle class and just getting the economy in general turned around, and noting that the very, very extremely poor already have a safety net. The class envy crowd took that and ran with it, and it's really an insult to everybody's intelligence. At least it should be. Anybody who's not a moron knew exactly what he was saying, and it just shows how ridiculous everything has gotten when it comes to this class envy stuff. Worrying about how much money the guy makes, what his tax returns are. But now that that's out there and everybody is just beating that to death, and the whole class envy routine is just blown way out of proportion now, and figures to get worse, by the way, over the next 10 months. I thought I'd run some figures by you here. Now, Barack Obama, the guy who was at the prayer meeting last week talking about how he doesn't just want to spread the wealth around and come up with these economic policies of his because he thinks it's going to help the economy, but also because he believes in what Jesus said about loving thy neighbor. Unfortunately for Barack, it turns out that back before he had to disclose his tax returns, before a lot of people were going to be looking at him because he was running for president, he gave 1% of his salary to charity. 1%. 1%. So he wants to love thy neighbor as long as he's loving thy neighbor with thy money, thou money, your money, not his. Al Gore, 1998. You know Al. He really cares about the least fortunate among us. That's all he cares about. He cares about saving the planet. He cares about the poor and the sick, and he just wants to do something. It just kills him. It burns him up inside how much he wants to help his fellow man, as long as it's with your money, not his. 1998 tax returns, $353 he gave to charity. That's $6 a week. Then when they asked him about it, somebody from his staff said, well, yeah, but they also gave clothes and food to the homeless. So he gave some of his old underwear to some homeless people and $6 a week. But he wants you to be forced to pay a lot more because he is a really compassionate guy. Maybe he'll come for your underwear someday. John Kerry, remember him? 1995, you know how much he gave to charity? Zero. Nothing. Not a nickel. John Kerry, not a nickel. But he spent $500,000 to buy a half interest in a 17th century painting that same year. Ted Kennedy, you remember Ted, who was more famous for coming from wealth, but for some reason having this deep and passionate caring for the poor and the least fortunate among us. Well, Ted back in the 70s, back when he was disclosing his tax forms because he was running for president, barely 1% he gave to charity. So again, he demands that we be more compassionate and show more love for the less fortunate among us, as long as he doesn't have to do it with his own money and he can come and get yours and then take credit for it and get votes by showing how compassionate he is. Robert Reich, one of my favorites. Remember he was a labor secretary under Bill Clinton, little guy, shows up on all the talk shows, always talking about how greedy conservatives and Republicans are and how we all have to share and everybody has to pay their fair share and we need to help the less fortunate. Well, Robert was making about $1.4 million a couple years ago, and he gave this was in 2002, I think he was running for governor, and he had to disclose it, 0.2% to charity. 0.2% of his income. What's that, about $1.50 a week? Part of that was a used drum set. That was included in his 1%, or 0.2%. Jesse Jackson regularly donates 1% of his actual income to charity. He cares. He really cares. He wants people to get more. He wants to give more to people who are in need, as long as he takes the money from you and gives it to them and then takes credit for it. Just don't ask him for his own money, if you don't mind. He'll pay his taxes, but don't ask him to give anything above that. And then there's the FDR, 1935. Who was more famous for caring about the less fortunate and coming up with programs that went on the way toward ruining the country, socialist programs. 1935, he was making something like $1.4 million a year in today's money. 2% he gave to charity. FDR, 2%. Ronald Reagan, mean guy, doesn't care about the poor, only cares about the rich, tax cuts for the rich, blah, blah, blah. Donated 4 times more money to charity than Ted Kennedy. And then there's Dick Cheney, the meanest man on the planet Earth. 77% of his income he gave to charity in 2005, the last time anybody looked. 77%. So when you hear these guys talking about how compassionate we should be and how compassionate, and you hear them getting credit for being compassionate, just remember they're being compassionate with your money and they ain't being all that compassionate with their own. Could we stop the class envy stuff, please? I'm begging you.